Hi, my name is Lisa Shelton. I'm really happy to be here today to share with you my presentation on nutrition for autism and related conditions. I was originally going to do this presentation as a live Zoom meeting. However, due to recent events, of course, COVID and social distancing, but that's actually been further compounded with wildfires throughout the West and in particular in my Southern Oregon region. Neighboring communities have had a lot of devastation. A lot of families have been displaced, and I thought it would really be best to have this information be viewable at the viewer's convenience, that they can access this playback at any point in time. So I'm going to go ahead and record my class today. I want to also let you know that I do have a couple children in the background who are students distance learning, and they may at any point in time need my attention and support. And that's one of the beauties of recording this class right now, is that I can press pause on recording and resume as the time goes. So let me go ahead and get to my screen share here so that we can actually get started today. All right, so once again, welcome to Nutrition for Autism and Related Conditions. Again, my name is Lisa Shelton. I am a health coach and a bioindividual nutrition practitioner. My background, I initially studied health coaching through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and then I eventually went on to get my master's degree in education, where I focused my thesis project on preconception and prenatal prevention of autism and parenting, nutrition for parenting the child with autism. From there, I went on to study with Dr. Kurt Wohler at the Integrative Medicine Academy in the Autism Mastery Program, and was introduced to Julie Matthews and knew that I also had to go study at Bioindividual Nutrition Institute, and really dove into not only her core program, but also her additional pediatrics program. And my background is in environmental studies, so I really have a very well-rounded picture of what's going on in the larger ecosystem and environment, as well as what's happening within our human body ecosystem, or the microbiome. I want to take a moment just to let you know that I am not a doctor, I'm not a physician, I'm not a registered dietitian or a psychologist or any other licensed medical professional. I do not diagnose, treat, cure illness, or prescribe. You should always seek guidance and support from your medical practitioner. And what else can I say? Oh, basically all the information in this presentation is for your knowledge. It's for educational purposes only. It's been gathered from my research and experience. So what is autism spectrum? Autism spectrum is really a continuum of two core symptoms. Number one, we have language, social communication, and interaction. And number two, restricted and repetitive behaviors. However, there are so very many co-occurring conditions that do occur alongside autism. This diagram on the right here really kind of spells it out. You can have all kinds of overlapping, learning disabilities, ADHD, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, sensory disorders, attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, you name it. There are so very many co-occurring conditions that can really diversify what an individual's autism spectrum condition may actually look like. And that said, biomedical approaches and bioindividual nutrition for autism and related disorders or co-occurring conditions really can have huge implications as far as ameliorating effects, and furthermore, just in many chronic diseases as well. So today we have 1 in 54 children with autism. This is an exponential increase from, not so far off past times. Back in 1970, 3 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. In 2010, we had 14.7 kids in 1,000. In 2016, 18.5 kids in 1,000 diagnosed with autism. And this is children age 8. But nowadays, 1 in 54 children is diagnosed with autism. And Additionally, boys are 4 times more likely than girls to have autism. Some may say, oh, well, detection's gotten, better and fine-tuned. And certainly monitoring and detecting for autism has improved. But it certainly does not account for the exponential increase in autism cases that we are seeing today. There are many causations of autism. There's genetic causes, neurological differences, gender differences, metabolism imbalances, infections, autoimmune disorders, inflammatory conditions, and environmental triggers. So what's becoming more popular today is the perspective that genes may predispose one to autism, while the environment may actually trigger the outcome. And this is what's increasingly capturing the attention, a combination or cumulative effect between the interaction of genes and environment. Nutrition and biomedicine, of course, can enhance the outcome. There's a lot of hope today for those that are challenged with this condition. Bio-individual nutrition and biomedical approaches can address the microbiome and may increase the rate of recovery. I don't want to lose sight of the importance of combining other therapies. So things like occupational therapy, speech and language pathology, social skills, academic support, all of these therapies are insurmountably important in assisting those with autism spectrum. But that said, we're finding that when we bring in biomedical and nutritional dietary approaches into the picture, the outcome of all therapies can be drastically improved. There really is a gut-brain connection. So our gut is often thought of as our second brain, and there is just an incredible plethora of synapses that connect and talk directly between our gut and our brain. And current research and clinical experience is really suggesting that in adult years, around 10% of those diagnosed with autism level 1 in childhood really can progress to subclinical levels of autism. What is biomedical support for autism? So again, I really, explored this whole perspective at Integrative Medicine Academy with Dr. Kurt Wooler, but there's 4 core pillars to really supporting someone. And that is number 1, diet and nutrition. Number 2, supplements. Supplementing is very, very important. These are considered nutrients, and in today's world, even if you eat an amazing healthy diet, you're probably not getting the amount of nutrients that you need. Our soils have been overfarmed and depleted of nutrients. Healthy foods don't have the same amount of nutrients in them. And additionally, many people on the spectrum experience a lot of sensory issues, textile issues, taste issues, and they tend to be picky eaters in a lot of cases, and so they're really not getting enough. Gut support is the 3rd pillar, and then supporting detoxification or methylation support is the 4th pillar. Let's go ahead and move right along. What is bio-individual nutrition? So I will go ahead and share this quote from Julie Matthews. Bio-individual nutrition is the practice of customizing diet and nutrition strategies to the unique biochemical and underlying needs of the individual. There's many dietary strategies that can be applied alone or integrated in combination. We have a tremendous amount of healing diets: an allergy-free diet, gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free, paleo, low phenol diets, low salicylates, low oxalate diets, and very often there's no one specific diet that, excuse me, that is going to make a difference to the individual. And it's really designing the correct diet for that individual's unique needs. And so combining diets and pulling principles from different diets can really make the difference. And with that said, I will also add that foods and environment can affect our chemistry, but subsequently, body chemistry can also affect our food tolerance. So again, a combination of environment, nutrition, gene expression, all of these things really determine our underlying biochemistry and can help with dietary direction. And just another quote, the latest nutrition science shows that many people with chronic health conditions suffer with issues relating to oxalates, salicylates, amines, histamine, glutamate, and FODMAPs, as well as poor mitochondrial function, methylation, transsulfuration, and sulfation. So those big words there all have to do with our body's detoxification ability and on a cellular level. So underlying biochemistry in autism. So these are some common factors that we typically see in autism. It is very common that autistic individuals suffer from inflammation and oxidative stress on a cellular level, immune system dysfunction, gastrointestinal upset. I actually did a study, a small study, and about 80% or 8 out of 10 individuals with autism really did suffer with gastrointestinal upset. Microbiome dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is an out of balance microbiome. You might have too many beneficial bacteria or not enough beneficial bacteria, or you might have way too many pathogenic, harmful bacteria. Reduced methylation, again, that's reduced ability to detoxify. Reduced transsulfuration and sulfation is kind of part of that whole process and cycle. Again, decreased detox, mitochondrial dysfunction, and poor gene expression. In particular, I will just highlight that about 79% of individuals with autism do have an MTHFR genetic defect, and that MTHFR gene really plays into the body's ability to utilize folate, which is part of that methylation detoxification cycle. So that is pretty significant, one example. So let's look at methylation and faulty methylation in autism. And these, charts here come from Bioindividual Nutrition Institute and Julie Matthews. I really, I've seen so many charts, and these really are the very best. But as you can see on the left here, we have biochemistry of methylation and transsulfuration. In the top part in the blue, we have the methylation cycle, which is where folate or the folic acid cycle plays into methylation. And as we head down from methionine through SAM and SOD, homocysteine, we drop down into the green, which is the transsulfuration cycle. And from there, cysteine and glutathione production. Glutathione is a very important antioxidant. It really helps to reduce oxidative stress. And from there, we can also head on over and we get into sulfate and taurine, which can have its hands in preventing seizures and also supporting digestion, producing bile salts. From sulfate, we drop down to sulfate, and that really aids digestion and detoxification and helps to create a healthy brain barrier as well as a gut barrier. And we have PST, the phenylsulfonylurea's enzyme, really helps to process phenols in diet or from our microbiome or environment. And on the right here, we have the effects of faulty biochemistry in autism. So as you can see, in autism, we have reduced methylation going on. So we have reduced methionine, reduced homocysteine. Down into transsulfuration, we have reduced cysteine and reduced glutathione. Again, that's that important antioxidant. So without enough glutathione, we have increased oxidative stress. You can see over on the bottom right, we have reduced sulfate. So that, of course, is going to reduce our ability to process phenols and lead to poor detoxification and poor digestion. So these are all really common factors that we see in autism. So again, with gene expression, I just want to go a little deeper here that there's many things that can influence our genes. Nutrition can influence our genes, and likewise, genes can influence our nutrition. So again, if we have that MTHFR genetic defect and we're not able to process folate well and our methylation cycle is not working well, this is also going to slow down our transsulfuration and our sulfation cycle as well. So we're not going to have as much of that PST, phenylsulfonylurea's enzyme. We're not going to have the ability to digest phenols as well. So you can see how this is kind of a two-way road. Similarly, toxins can influence our genes, and our genes can also influence toxins, whether or not we are able to detoxify efficiently. Our microbiome can influence our genes, and our genes can influence our microbiome. So for instance, if we have a pathogenic organism, Clostridia difficile, for example, C. difficile, that actually produces a byproduct for creosote, which is a phenolic compound. And so again, we can just see how the microbiome can influence our genes and likewise back and forth there. Let's dive into bioindividual nutrition. So with bioindividual nutrition, of course, I love the image of eating a rainbow. It is very important to have a very diverse diet, and that really kind of is the overarching goal in bioindividual nutrition. While people might have to originally dive into diets to allow to take the pressure off, to alleviate and allow the gut to heal, eventually we want to work on diversifying the diet as much as possible so that we're not missing out on important nutrients in our diet. Bioindividual nutrition really focuses on a whole number of healing and therapeutic diets, and these can be done individually. They can be combined in all sorts of ways to meet the individual's needs. But we're going to talk a bit today about the gluten, casein, soy-free diet, allergy-free diets, grain-free diets, low-carb diets, low FODMAP diets, anti-yeast diets, low oxalate diets, low phenol diets, and let's go ahead and do that. So this wonderful Nourishing Hope food pyramid is absolutely fantastic. Not only does it really set the stage for a healthy diet for the general population, but with a little bit of tailoring, you can actually adapt this food pyramid to meet the needs of any number of healing diets. At its core are the foundations at the very bottom. And this is just really a phenomenal setup because it really highlights the importance of a healthy diet. It's very important that we're eating grass-fed animal food products. We don't want to have the grain-fed or soy-fed or unhealthy animals. We really need to be going in a direction of healthy animal consumption. Broths, bone broths, and vegetable broths are very nourishing. Fermentations like pickles or sauerkraut or kimchi, the kind that comes from the refrigerator section, or you can make at home yourself, not the pasteurized ones from the store shelf. That's not what we're talking about there. Soaking and sprouting is very important. So we can actually soak and sprout grains before consuming them, and beans, and little green sprouts, of course, brassicas especially, are extremely healthy and healing and help with the detoxification. Incorporating some raw foods in our diet is very important. Having, a variety of raw and cooked foods, and not too much of one or the other. Juicing, extremely important. Of course, we don't want to just be eating pure fruit juice. That would be extremely high in sugar. Typically, one might sit down and eat an orange, but you probably wouldn't sit down and eat 6 or 8 oranges, which can easily go into a glass of juice. So when we're juicing, we're also talking about vegetable juicing. This might be a little cup, a little image here of carrot, orange, ginger juice, perhaps, maybe with some celery in there as well. Green juices are excellent. Having quality water and quality sea salt, real salt, Himalayan sea salt, Celtic sea salt, the real thing. And again, the importance of supplementation. No matter how well we are eating today, we're not getting enough nutrients alone from our food. So it is very important to have supplements and that they are quality supplements. Quality is very important so that you don't have fillers or additives, or that there's high standards in where they come from and how they're produced. Let's see, looking on the right side of the pyramid is some foods that are only when tolerated. So starchy tubers are not for everyone. Casein and dairy is not for everyone. And of course, in the bottom right corner, raw dairy would be more suiting to the foundations. But as you can see, just above the foundations, we have our animal protein, which is all of our energy, and we have our vegetables, which is our stay healthy foods, and then we have our fats and oils, which is our brain foods, our thinking foods. And then above that, we have fruits, nuts, and seeds. And then at the very top of the pyramid, we have our gluten-free grains and legumes. Again, not everything fits into every diet. So for a lot of diets, you might, for instance, on paleo diet, you might be just crossing off that grains and legumes, putting a big X through that at the top of the pyramid. But this design really is very flexible and allows us to really shape it to meet the needs of any diet that you may be following at any point in time. Foods to avoid on the Nourishing Hope food pyramid include gluten and soy. And of course, as I mentioned, dairy is only when tolerated. Avoiding added sugars and refined flours, avoiding artificial additives, nutrient sulfites, monosodium glutamates, pesticides, and genetically modified organisms, artificial sweeteners, trans fats, avoiding personal allergen foods. Anyone can be allergic to any food, and it's important to not eat foods that you are allergic to or intolerant of, and avoiding or limiting high oxalate foods, which we will talk about more as we get going here. So just another glimpse of the foods to avoid. Again, additional considerations are going to be casein or dairy, unless tolerated. And generally within the autism population, it is best to avoid dairy. Corn also can be problematic. It's a medium for mold growth, and it can definitely be problematic. On the right here, we have the 2020 Dirty Dozen food list. As you can see, strawberries and spinach at the top there. These have made #1 for the worst food offenders for the last 4 straight years in a row. They are very low growing to the ground, so they get heavily doused with pesticides and herbicides. Kale, nectarines, apples, grapes, peaches, cherries, pears, tomatoes, celery, potatoes. These are all foods that you're going to want to eat organically and GMO free. How do we determine dietary direction? It takes a lot of searching, and we want to look at things like food cravings. Oftentimes we crave the foods that are worst for us. Diet journaling is really insightful. We want to look for reactions to foods. We want to look for common symptoms that the individual may be experiencing, symptoms that may actually be clues as to what foods might be problematic. Laboratory testing can be very helpful, and looking at genetics as well can be very helpful. And of course, taking in life considerations. You know, are you living at home? Do you have access to a kitchen? And are you able to keep a lot of foods on hand and ready-made foods in the refrigerator and freezer? Or are you working and traveling and flying a lot and staying in hotels and eating out a lot? Because we have to be reasonable in our expectations. We have to choose diets and nutrition directions that are going to be beneficial and doable. As far as implementing diets, we really want to look at, and recognize what the symptoms are, what is going on for the individual. And from there, with diet, we really want to relieve the symptoms, relieve the triggers, the things that are causing problems. And at that point, we can actually work on restoring and healing the gut. And from there, we can actually start to bring back and reintroduce foods. Again, we want to diversify the diet. We don't want to miss out on important nutritious elements that are out there and available to us. Journaling and recording, and then refining the diet even more for the individual, finding their threshold of what they can eat or how much of something they can eat before it transitions from being beneficial to being problematic. So let's go ahead and dive right into the popular gluten-free, casein-free diet. I think it's fairly self-explanatory and well-known. Gluten's found in wheat, barley, and oats, unless if the oats are certified gluten-free, they are contaminated with gluten. spelt, kamut, and triticale. There's also a lot of ingredients and hidden sources of gluten as well. Hydrolyzed vegetable protein, monosodium glutamate, dextrin, malt, citric acid, artificial flavors, and artificial colors. Spices, soy sauce, potatoes, chips, and fries often are contaminated. But that said, there's a lot more complexity to wheat and gluten than gluten itself. There's glutenins and gliadins and agglutinins. Gliadin is actually the most problematic compound for celiac disease most often. Gliadin also causes zonulin release, and this occurs in all individuals, and zonulin increases intestinal permeability. So our intestine is supposed to be like a rubber dish glove. It's supposed to keep what is inside the glove, and it is supposed to keep all the other stuff outside the glove, and there's not supposed to be any crossover or contamination there. But when we have increased intestinal permeability, this means that there's inflammation in the gut. It means that all those tight junctions in our gut are inflamed, they're leaking, and we can have undigested food proteins and particles that leak out of our gut. And next thing you know, the body is going, oh my gosh, what is this foreign thing? Let's attack, and we're going to start to develop more food sensitivities or intolerances. Casein is found in all dairy. And what we have found from studies is that a subset of children with autism do benefit from the gluten-free, casein-free diet, as well as a lot of people experiencing anxiety. Strictness and duration on this diet is very important if you want to see behavior improvements. We have found from studies that after 8 months, 12 months, 24 months, this is when we see the most improvements, and strictness is very important. And this is assuming, that there's fewer than 1 or 2 errors in diet within a calendar year. If you are having errors in diet or slips every month or every week, you're probably not going to see the behavioral benefits that we would otherwise expect. So the gluten-free, casein-free diet can have ameliorating effects on communication, social function, reduced hyperactivity, and it can imply improved attention, concentration, and capacity to learn. So gluten and casein can have an opiate-like effect. Again, casein is found in dairy. It can irritate the brain and lead to worsening autism behaviors. And improperly digested proteins of gluten and casein turn into these substances called opiates. So gluten and casein opiates can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and block certain areas of the brain and act as morphine and heroin would. They can also be very addictive, and you can have withdrawal symptoms upon elimination of these foods. Urinary peptide abnormalities indicate insufficient breakdown of gluten and casein proteins and tend to correspond with autistic disorders. So the higher the urinary peptides, the more severe the autism. Gluteomorphins and caseomorphines have also been found in urine serum and spinal fluid, and soy or soy morphines can also form opiates as well. So the gluten-free, casein-free diet is actually much better done as the gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet. So really, when we discuss gluten-free, casein-free diet, we should be assuming that this is also a soy-free diet. Soy protein is very similar to gluten and casein. It includes opiates, and soy is known to be a crossover allergen closely related with dairy. Along with gluten and casein, soy is known to have greater pro-inflammatory effects in children with autism. Soy can irritate the gastrointestinal system. It can block absorption of calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, copper due to the phytic acids and oxalates in soy. It can block thyroid function, and it's an endocrine disruptor and can disrupt reproductive hormones as well. Soy foods include things like tofu, soy protein, miso, tempeh, soy milk, cheese or ice cream, soy sauce, tamari, soy oil, and hidden sources in soy lecithin, which often you might see in chocolates, and vitamin E oil as well. So symptoms that we might see in relation to gluten and casein and soy consumption, we might see gastrointestinal complaints, diarrhea or constipation, nutrient malabsorption, deficiencies, and other associated disorders and diseases. Food cravings or addiction, again, inflammation, pain, autoimmune diseases, high pain tolerance, inattention and spacey behaviors, so ADD, ADHD, or hyperactivity, stimming and tics, poor eye contact, red cheeks or ears, dark circles under the eyes, difficulty speaking, aggression, mood changes, including anxiety and depression. But additional symptoms can include things like anemia, autoimmune disease, dermatitis, diabetes, hypoglycemia, fatigue, hair loss, headaches, infertility, joint pain, nausea, osteoporosis, peripheral neuropathy, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So opioid peptides can cause many of the things that we see in autism. A better term for the gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet is the healthy gluten, casein, soy-free diet, just to sum it up more specifically. A common pitfall of the gluten-free, casein-free diet is that it can be very high in junk foods, sugar, processed, artificial foods. So the healthy gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet is best done by incorporating more whole foods and fewer processed foods. This study over here on the right was a comprehensive nutritional study for autism spectrum disorder. A lot of amazing scientists and researchers were involved in this. James Adams study, as well as Julie Matthews, my teacher from Bioindividual Nutrition Institute. And let me just go ahead and share this abstract with you. The study involved a randomized control, single-blind, 12-month treatment study of comprehensive nutritional dietary intervention. Participants were 67 children and adults with autism spectrum ages 3 to 58 years old, and 50 non-sibling neurotypical controls of similar age and gender. Treatment began with a special vitamin mineral supplement, and additional treatments were added subsequently, including essential fatty acids, Epsom salt baths, carnitine, digestive enzymes, and healthy gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet. There was a significant improvement in nonverbal intellectual ability in the treatment group compared to the non-treatment group based on a blinded and clinical assessment. Based on semi-blindness assessment, the treatment group compared to the non-treatment group had significantly greater improvement in autism spectrum and developmental age. The treatment group had significantly greater increase in the EPA and DHA carnitine vitamins, A and Bs, and folic acid, coenzyme Q10. The positive results of the study suggest that a comprehensive nutritional and dietary intervention is effective at improving nutritional status, nonverbal IQ, autism symptoms, and other symptoms in most individuals with autism spectrum disorder. Parents reported that the vitamin mineral supplements, essential fatty acids, and healthy gluten, casein, soy-free diet were the most beneficial. So this was a really significant study that just came out recently in 2018. So as far as the healthy gluten-free, casein-free diet goes, it tends to be a prerequisite diet for most of the other healing and therapeutic diets. Trying the diet is really the gold standard. Certainly testing, food allergy, food intolerance, IgG, etc. testing can be very insightful and convincing. However, testing is not always accurate. If you tend to get a positive on a food allergy test, that's pretty certain. However, you can get false negatives on food allergy tests as well, because there's a lot of components that may not be tested in that test. Sticking to whole foods and fewer processed foods is also kinder on the budget. And again, most diets remove gluten and casein. And a benefit of this diet is that it tends to be easier to do than most of the other special diets. How to remove gluten, casein, and soy from the diet. So I would recommend considering to do a celiac disease test first. You can only test for celiac disease while you're eating gluten. Thus, it's important to test before you eliminate gluten. Why that would be important is because if you do have celiac disease, it can really be causing a lot of damage. And with with the knowledge of having it, you can be far, far more careful than you might ever otherwise be, as far as avoiding cross-contamination or eating things that are prepared, even in a facility or space that might have gluten flour flying around, cross-contamination. Celiac is really interesting because while the majority of people do experience gastrointestinal upset, some people do not experience gastrointestinal upset at all and may experience other symptoms such as skin disorders or joint pain, for instance. And there is also a population of people that are non-symptomatic celiac. And even in those cases, great damage is happening within the gastrointestinal system, damage to the small intestine, reducing ability to be able to uptake nutrients, which of course can lead to malabsorption and deficiencies and a whole host of chronic problems. So as far as removing gluten, casein, and soy, your options are to remove one at a time or remove all three at once. I would actually start by introducing alternatives. So start bringing in some quinoa, rice, coconut milk, dairy-free cheeses. You might start by removing casein and soy together. You don't want to make the mistake of removing dairy and resorting to soy milk alternatives. And be sure to keep a food journal as you go along. You want to note any physical, mood, or behavioral changes that occur. A few weeks later, you might remove gluten and continue to journal. Journaling is really insightful and helpful. Food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. So there's a lot of different ways that one can have problems with foods. Food IgE allergies are usually the acute and immediate reactions. They're obvious. You might get hives. Worst case scenario would be anaphylactic shock. Common foods that might trigger IgEs can be things like peanuts or eggs, but really any food somebody can have an IgE reaction to. Then there's food sensitivities. There's IgGs, IgMs, IgAs. Of course, you can get a food sensitivity, food allergy test done. Lots of times they are only looking at the IgGs and they may or may not look at IgAs or IgMs, for instance. So again, you can see why false negatives can occur. Delayed reaction can be days or weeks before you see any kind of reaction to food sensitivities. So it's very difficult to connect the dots to a reaction in something you've eaten. These types of food sensitivities do have an immune system response. They have digestive disturbances, inflammation, pain, hyperactivity, anxiety. Common foods include gluten, casein, soy, corn, and really any food as well. And then there's food intolerances, which may not even show up on a number of food sensitivity testing. But these can also be delayed and difficult to pinpoint. It involves other ways that the body may not be tolerating foods. And again, examples can include dairy, gluten, grains, lectins, salicylates, amines, glutamates, FODMAPs, fructose, you name it. Top offending foods tend to be wheat, gluten, dairy and casein, soy, corn, eggs, citrus, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, sesame. Sesame is the most allergenic seed, and beef. So corn is actually a grain, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a medium for mold growth. It's also possibly the #1 genetically modified food in the world, and BT corn produces its own insecticide. Soy today is also largely genetically modified, and it can also be BT pesticide producing as well. Dr. John Green with Children and Autism, I believe it's the Evergreen Center Clinic, has some wonderful resources. His first steps recommend removing the 4 most common food offenders: gluten, casein, soy, and corn. There's a lot of foods that can also cross-react with gluten, and these include dairy, yeast, oats, millet, rice, and corn. So elimination and rotation. Some foods or proteins really need to be avoided indefinitely. Typically foods like gluten and egg sensitivities are not going to go away, and you really need to avoid them forever. Other times, foods may need to be avoided at first, and the focus can be on healing the gut, reducing inflammation and oxidative stress. And with time, tolerance may improve. These tend to be foods more along the lines of things like cantaloupe or cabbage. Again, food testing can be an insightful and helpful place to start. If it's something that you are able to do, I do highly recommend it because it can save time and effort. If something does show up as a red flag, you can just go ahead and cross that off your list, and you don't need to worry about eliminating and doing a provocation test on that food, and you can move on to other foods that are suspicious. So again, you can get false negatives, and keep that in mind. And of course, the elimination provocation test really is the gold standard to determining food tolerance. Food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances can also show up in a wide variety of symptoms, including hyperactivity, irritability, aggression, foggy thinking, anxiety, food addictions, red cheeks and ears, dark circles under the eyes, hives, skin rashes, asthma, stimming, gastrointestinal complaints, as in diarrhea, constipation, pain, and gas, headaches, inflammation, pain, joint pain, sleep disturbances, to name a few. Let's go ahead and dive into the grain-free diets. So within this section, I have the specific carbohydrate diet, the gut and psychology syndrome diets, and the paleo diet, which is the most flexible of the grain-free diets. So most grain-free diets are also no beans or selective beans. And the problem with beans and grains is legumes specifically, or beans and grains, are polysaccharides, which may have incomplete digestion and absorption, which can lead to gastrointestinal problems, inflammation, and can feed pathogenic organisms. Beans and certain grains contain FODMAPs, which are fermentable carbohydrates that can feed gut bacteria. Oxalates are an anti-nutrient and a mineral inhibitor. So they actually bind to minerals, rendering minerals in your foods unavailable to you. And they are an anti-nutrient because they actually pull on your nutrient reserves in order to process. So oxalates have a host of negative effects in the body, in particular due to their effects on mitochondria and mitochondria damage. Mitochondria, of course, is the energy storehouse in all of our cells. Phytates are also an anti-nutrient and mineral inhibitor, and they are inflammatory. And lectins are an anti-nutrient and mineral inhibitor, and they are inflammatory. They're also agglutinating, which can clump cells together and create problems there as well. So diving a little bit more into the specific carbohydrate diet, this diet really comes from Elaine Gottschall's book, Breaking the Vicious Cycle. It was written for a diet for Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis, celiac disease, cystic fibrosis, and chronic diarrhea. And it is also highly beneficial for autism and things like small intestine bacteria overgrowth. Basically, when carbohydrates are not digested properly, they become fast food for microbes in the gut. They become a source of gas, and unabsorbed carbohydrates have great influence over the intestinal microbiome. Undigested carbohydrates within the small intestine encourage microbes to expand beyond the colon into the small intestine, which contribute to SIBO. So normally in a healthy gut, you're going to find majority of microbes in the large intestine or colon, and not so much in the small intestine. But again, with food not digesting properly and inflammation in the gastrointestinal system, these microbes can start to migrate into places where they don't belong. So microbes in the small intestine, excuse me, one moment. Zen, quiet. Microbes in the small intestine produce byproducts that can damage the intestine. And from Elaine Gottschall, there is a growing body of scientific evidence that lactic acid formed from fermentation in the intestine causes abnormal brain function and behavior, which could account for the behavioral problems which often accompany intestinal disorders. So the specific carbohydrate diet for autism and ADHD book is based off of the Lane Gottschall's book. However, this one is refined by Pamela Farrow and Raman Prasad, specifically to address autism and ADHD. This book focuses on ADHD, sorry, it omits dairy. So that's kind of the big difference between Elaine Gottschall's Breaking the Vicious Cycle and Farrow and Prasad's book here, is that it really omits dairy because typically the autism and ADHD population do not benefit from dairy consumption. Some environmental factors can be changed, thereby improving symptoms of autism and ADHD. In this book, we are focusing on the environmental factor of food with the goal of improving digestion to affect behavior, cognition, language, and mood. So the specific carbohydrate diet removes disaccharides and polysaccharides and allows for some beans. Disaccharides are two molecule sugars that need enzymes for digestion and absorption, things like sucrose, lactose, table sugar, and maple syrup. Polysaccharides are starches that require enzymes for digestion and absorption as well, things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, wheat, rice, millet, all grains, and mucilaginous fiber, including flaxseed, aloe, and seaweed. Without proper enzymes and absorption, disaccharides and polysaccharides or complex carbohydrates, such as starches and double sugars, become food for bacteria. They cause dysbiosis or an out of balance gut and gastrointestinal symptoms. Simple sugars are necessary for absorption into the bloodstream and as fuel for the body. And so when we are unable to process these disaccharides and polysaccharides and convert them into simple sugars, we are not able to absorb them and use them and utilize them in our body. Honey happens to be a single simple sugar, and so honey is a sweetener that is allowed on this diet. The goal of the specific carbohydrate diet is really to stop abnormal fermentation, to heal the leaky gut, and to encourage rebalancing of the microflora and reducing oxidative stress, which of course, as I've mentioned earlier in this presentation, those on the autism spectrum do suffer with oxidative stress. This diet requires strict adherence. There is an intro diet, and it does allow for lactobacillus probiotics as well. Foods to avoid on this diet include grains, corn, legumes, certain legumes, soy, potatoes, sweet potatoes, sugar, except for honey. Avoid cornstarch, arrowroot powder, tapioca, agar-agar, carrageenan, pectin in jams, chocolate, carob, baking powder. And for autism and ADHD, we want to avoid dairy and casein as well. Foods that are allowed on this diet include non-starchy vegetables, fruit juice, not from concentrate, honey, meat, eggs, nuts and seeds, milk, nut milks, certain beans, such as dried navy, adzuki, lima beans, lentils, peas, and split peas, ghee, and healthy oils. The specific carbohydrate diet, again, is good for SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, especially in combination with the low FODMAPs diet, which I will talk more about a little bit later. It's good for pathogenic bacteria overgrowth, yeast problems, and gastrointestinal complaints and inflammation in general. And it does allow for sweets that are not generally allowed on other anti-yeast and microbial diets, that is in the form of honey and fruits as well. The specific carbohydrate diet is more flexible than the GAPS diet, which I will also talk about in a moment. Things to be aware of on this diet. The specific carbohydrate does allow for dairy on the traditional diet, and this might be problematic for autism and ADHD, which is why dairy is removed in Farrow and Prasad's book. The diet also may allow for too many nuts and nut flours. It can be very easy to look at the diet and go, oh, I can eat almond flour, and start eating, consuming way too many almond flour muffins or cookies or whatever it is that you're eating. It can be very high in oxalates and can become problematic. We'll talk more about oxalates in a little bit. The diet can also be very high in vegetables and fruits, which can be higher in salicylates and can be problematic to certain individuals. And it may be difficult for picky eaters. Whoops. So again, this specific carbohydrate diet, it really works at correcting the abnormal fermentation. It recognizes that we have harmful bacteria that eat undigested sugars and food particles, which can add to a host of gastrointestinal complaints and behaviors in autism. Things that we might see include stomach discomfort, agitation, stimming, crying, pressing on the abdomen, gritting teeth, screaming, aggression, and self-injurious behavior. It recognizes that there is a leaky gut and malabsorption. So abnormal fermentation lowers our levels of magnesium and B vitamins and zinc and other nutrients and minerals. It changes our mood. It impacts muscular and circulatory function and can cause behavioral change. It feeds pathogenic bacteria, and undigested proteins enter the bloodstream, which can increase food intolerances. Essential nutrients are not absorbed, and there's a weakened immune system. And of course, this can lead to oxidative stress. Autism and ADHD do suffer from high levels of oxidative stress. They also do not have enough antioxidants that decrease in the methylation cycle, leading to a decrease in transsulfuration and a decrease of that important glutathione antioxidant. These are important antioxidants to clean up oxidative stress. And oxidative stress, of course, is an imbalance of free radicals and antioxidants. I want to share this, which comes right out of Farrow and Prasad's book. It's really just struck me as very important. It was kind of an aha when you consider how long it might take to see benefits from the gluten-free, casein-free diet. For example, at 8, 12, and 24 months is when the benefits really kick in. So brain inflammation takes a very long time to go away. Quote, a study that supports the idea of strict adherence. Researchers injected mice with endotoxins, the same endotoxins that make up the cell membranes of harmful bacteria. The endotoxins caused inflammation that lasted for 9 hours in the bloodstream, 1 week in the liver, and 10 months in the brain. This study is relevant because even a little cheating on the diet may feed harmful bacteria and prolong existing inflammation, end quote. So, wow, inflammation in the brain can take up to 10 months to go away. Inflammation caused by diet and food sensitivity or intolerance. That's powerful knowledge right there. The gut and psychology syndrome diet, which is often referred to more simply as the GAPS diet, is by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. It is based on the specific carbohydrate diet and focuses on removing disaccharides and polysaccharides, also allowing for some beans. This diet was really designed as a natural treatment for autism, dyslexia, depression, dyspraxia, ADD, ADHD, schizophrenia, to name a few. It aims to restore the normal intestinal flora and gut health. It focuses on reducing gut inflammation, invasion from viruses and pathogenic organisms and yeast, such as Candida albicans, which does affect this population. So the population with autism spectrum typically does struggle with an imbalance of yeast. The GAPS diet, of course, being based on the specific carbohydrate diet, removing disaccharides and polysaccharides, it also removes all grains, all starchy vegetables, sugar, soy, lactose starchy beans. It does allow some beans. Mostly the same food list as the specific carbohydrate and incorporates more nourishing foods and gut healing and soothing meat stocks and bone broths and fermented foods, supplements, detoxification principles, and lifestyle changes. There are a few differences. While baking soda is not allowed on the GAPS diet, cocoa is allowed during later stages of GAPS diet. GAPS also has an intro diet and requires strict adherence to the diet. However, the intro diet foods are different than the specific carbohydrate diet. For instance, you're going to see a lot more bone broths. Similar benefits as the specific carbohydrate diet. It is good for small intestine bacteria overgrowth, pathogenic or bacteria or yeast overgrowth. It's helpful with GI complaints and inflammation and allows for sweets. You must adhere to this diet for 1.5 to 2 years to achieve and achieve normal digestion for at least 6 months prior to coming off of the diet. Things to be aware of: the GAPS diet does incorporate a lot more bone broths, which are very high in amines, and amines are not tolerated by some people. So for some people, this is not the right diet. It can also be very high in nuts or nut flours, which are very high in oxalates, and it can be very high in veggies and fruits, some of which can be high in salicylates and problematic to some people. The intro stages of this diet also are too low in carbs for some people, especially if there is a mitochondrial disorder going on. You can certainly skip the intro diet if it's not for you, but then again, it really wouldn't be the GAPS diet. You would probably be better off considering something more flexible, such as the specific carbohydrate diet instead. The paleo diet is the most flexible of the grain-free diets with the fewest rules. There are many authors of the paleo diet. I really love Sarah Ballantyne's book over here, Paleo Principles. It is absolutely a fantastic resource. Some people may say the aim of the paleo diet is to return to a way of eating more in line with what early humans ate. However, according to Ballantyne, the paleo diet may have little to do with reenacting what our early ancestors ate and everything to do with what modern science says is best for our bodies. The principles follow the latest nutrition science research. This diet can be good for balancing blood sugar issues, for gastrointestinal issues, and this diet is also a very nourishing diet when it incorporates grass-fed and pastured animal protein. The diet focuses on micronutrient foods essential to life: organ meats, seafoods, vegetables, fruits, eggs, nuts, seeds, healthy fats, and fermented probiotic-rich foods. The diet omits problematic foods or foods that are inflammatory or disruptive to hormones or harmful to the gut. So there's no grains, breads, or pastas, including pseudo grains like quinoa, millet, and buckwheat, which actually are not grains. They are grain-like seeds. It also does not include beans, refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, soda, and fruit juices. It avoids some vegetable oils, such as soybean, sunflower, corn, grapeseed, and safflower. It also avoids trans fats, artificial sweeteners, highly processed foods, and anything labeled diet or low fat, as well as food additives. Starchy tubers, such as potatoes and sweet potatoes, are optional if tolerated. Some versions of the paleo diet omit dairy, while others allow for full fat butter and cheese. Be aware that this diet can be too low in carbs for some people if they are not eating enough vegetables and fruits. As far as the specific carbohydrate diet, gut and psychology syndrome diet, and paleo diet go, common signs and symptoms that disaccharides, polysaccharides, complex carbs, or grains may be problematic include language impairment, head banging, self-injurious actions, gut pain, obsessive compulsive disorder, which can come from pathogens, skin rashes, tics, gastrointestinal complaints such as diarrhea, constipation, gas and pain, inflammation, and pain as well. Let's talk a little bit about the ketogenic diet. This is a low carbohydrate diet. The keto diet eliminates or restricts all types of carbohydrates. The body and brain use fat converted into ketones for energy rather than glucose. It can have neuroprotective effects from burning ketones. Initially, this diet was used to treat epilepsy and seizures. However, today it's also being used for a wide variety of conditions, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, weight loss. This diet is not for everyone. If carbs are lowered too much, or if someone does not have adequate fatty acid oxidation required to use ketones or fats for energy, they may crash on this low carb diet. Other things to be aware of: There can be long-term negative effects of the diet affecting the heart and kidneys, but in some cases, when there are difficult to control seizures, the benefits of the ketogenic diet can outweigh the risks. Ketoacidosis or unregulated ketone production is a life-threatening and common in untreated type 1 diabetes with deficiency in insulin. So there certainly are contraindications to the ketogenic diet. Things like carnitine deficiency. Carnitine is an important nutrient that helps in the fatty acid transportation and utilization. Fatty acid oxidation issues, uncontrolled type 1 diabetes, kidney issues, pregnancy, some mitochondrial issues can be contradicted with ketogenic diet. On the other hand, there are some mitochondrial issues that can benefit from keto. But adrenal stress and high cortisol, valproate, which is an anti-seizure medicine, is a contraindication, all just to name a few. So it is very, very important if you are embarking on a ketogenic diet to have baseline labs and follow-up labs done regularly. So always work with a doctor when you are doing the ketogenic diet. There are several approaches to a ketogenic diet. There's the classic keto diet, the modified Atkins diet, the MCT keto diet, and the Paleo Plus, Wahls Paleo Plus diet, which is a form of MCT keto. The general classic keto principles are 4-to-1 fat to combined carbs and protein, 40 to 50 grams carbs per day, 70 to 75% calories from fat, 20 to 25% calories from protein, and 5 to 10% calories from carbs. You want to avoid all starches, sugar, and most carbs, and allow only a small amount of carbs from non-starchy vegetables. The intro diet does require a hospital stay and fasting within the hospital stay. In general, a keto diet should always be followed with a medical doctor's oversight. The modified Atkins diet, carbs are reduced to 10 grams per day the first month, and then increased as tolerated to 20 or 30 grams per day. There's no restriction on protein and calories. This version is also effective for seizures. There's no hospitalization required. However, beware that too much protein can actually convert into glucose or sugar and be counterproductive, ending ketosis. The medium chain triglyceride MCT ketogenic diet utilizes coconut oil, which converts very readily into ketones. The MCT keto diet is more flexible. It's more pleasing to the person because it allows one to eat more carbs, up to 19% of calories, and less fats, only 50% of calories. It replaces dairy fats with coconut oil, making it a good option for people with dairy intolerance, allergies, and a good option for those with autism. It also is effective at managing seizures and no hospitalizations required. Let's take a look at the Weston A. Price's nutrient-dense diet. So Weston A. Price was a dentist. He studied the relationship between nutrition and dental health and physical health. He studied a wide variety of traditional isolated cultures around the world. He found that, quote, every member of the tribe or village enjoyed superb health. They were free of chronic disease and dental decay and mental illness. However, he then discovered that when traditional cultures adopted modern or industrialized foods, high in refined flours, processed foods, devitalized fats, and low in vitamins and minerals, their teeth decayed, and from there, their health as well. WestonAPrice.org is a wonderful resource online. And Sally Fallon wrote her book, Nourishing Tradition, which is largely based off of Weston A. Price's work. The diet of the populations that Dr. Price studied varied, but they did share common factors. Quote, they ate liberally of seafood or other animal proteins and fats in the form of organ meats and dairy products. They valued animal fats as absolutely necessary to good health, and they ate fats, meats, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains in their whole, unrefined state. All primitive diets contained some raw foods of both animal and vegetable origin. Foods that were beneficial to fertility were prized. These were things like liver and organ meat, fish liver oils, fish eggs, pasteurized, pasture-raised butter. Sorry, not pasteurized. Okay, and traditional cultures ate no white sugar or white flour, no refined or devitalized, no pasteurized or non-fat milk, and no canned foods. Sally Fallon really highlights the importance of food preparation techniques of traditional people. Quote, almost universally, these societies allow grains, milk products, and often vegetables, fruits, and meats to ferment or pickle by a process called lactofermentation. Lactofermentation makes nutrients in these foods more available and supplies the intestinal tract with health-promoting lactic acid and lactic acid-producing bacteria. Bone broths and their abundance in minerals, calcium, gelatin were also important tradition in ethnic diets. And moving right into the body ecology diet, which is an anti-yeast diet. Donna Gates is absolutely wonderful. And she's really been a pioneer in recovering our kids from autism. You can find her Facebook site, The Body Ecology Diet, Recovering Our Kids, or Bedrock. It really recognizes our body has an inner ecosystem, more popularly coined the microbiome. And this is a diet that was very dear to my own personal life and transformation for some time. And I really still, to this day, incorporate a lot of the principles from the body ecology diet into my personalized way of eating. Again, it's an anti-yeast diet, so there's no sugar on this diet. It reaches to whole leaf stevia as the sweetener of choice. There are 4 body ecology grain-like seeds allowed on the diet: quinoa, millet, amaranth, and buckwheat. However, it does incorporate individuality and looks at blood type, and does mention that blood type B should probably not eat buckwheat. Eventually, you can reintroduce other grains like white or brown rice and gluten-free noodles, and replace your bread with rice cakes, and recommends that you never go back to eating wheat. Again, food intolerances, things like intolerances to wheat or dairy or eggs, things like that, peanuts, you probably should never go back to eating. Foods to avoid on the diet include sugars, alcohol, breads and flour products, and grains. Citric acid found in many foods and teas, so read labels. Legumes, beans, and peanuts, they are too difficult to digest, cause fermentation, and attract fungus growth. Mushrooms can be problematic and encourage allergic reactions. However, dried shiitake is okay. Nut butter and nut milks, including almond milk, are very acid forming. They often contain sugar too, so careful there. Oils, other than those discussed, we want to avoid things like refined, bleached, deodorized canola, soybean, peanut, toasted sesame. Beneficial healthy oils that you're going to find like on the Nourishing Traditions diet are going to be things like coconut oil, lard, olive oil, although you shouldn't cook or heat with olive oil. Those are good, healthy, beneficial oils. Also, you want to, on the body ecology diet, avoid yeast or bakers or brewers yeast, as they can cause allergic reactions. A lot of wonderful principles within the body ecology diet. Number 1 is the expansion contraction. So actually, if you look at the center diagram there, understanding the yin and yang qualities of food, you can see that the foods up towards the top or crown of the tree are either more yin or salty foods, or more yang, more of the sugary foods over there. And foods towards the bottom or roots of the tree are less yang and less yin. And the way the expansion contraction principle works is that if you were to go eat a bunch of salty chips, for instance, that are at the very high end of the more yang foods, you're going to have a craving for sugary foods in order to balance that expansion contraction going on. And likewise, if you eat a bunch of sugar or alcohol, for instance, you're going to crave salty things. That's why lots of times if you go to the bar and you're drinking beer, they're going to put salted peanuts out on the counter for you. So the best way to manage or balance your expansion contraction is to actually eat foods that are lower, less yang or less yin, more neutral foods, things like your whole grains and sea vegetables, beans, fish, leafy green vegetables, and root veggies. Principle number 2 is the acid alkaline principle. So you can see over on the right there, the pH spectrum. We have all of our soda pops and fast foods and junk foods and colas and that looks like fruit juice, coffee and different things over there are going to be acidic. And then of course we have our water is going to be neutral. And then we have all of our alkaline foods, which is going to be all of our plant-based foods. Our healthiest neutral pH is going to be slightly alkaline, a little bit more than 7. I think it's like 7.4 thereabouts is kind of where we want to aim to be. Principle of uniqueness. So again, Donna Gates and her body ecology diet really looks a lot to James D'Adamo's blood type diet theory to help guide for the individual. Principle 4 is cleansing, and actually recognizing our body's innate ability to naturally cleanse and welcoming a little cold or a little fever as a body's way of cleansing a virus or an invasion on our system. Principle number 5 is proper food combining. So normally if someone is very healthy and their gut is in good standing order, food combining might not be so much of a concern at all. However, when we are suffering from gastrointestinal damage and upset, food combining can be super duper instrumental as far as what foods combine well together and are compatible to allow for easy digestion and nutrient absorption, and which foods can be problematic together. And as you can see from the food combining chart on the right, animal protein goes well with non-starchy and ocean vegetables. Starchy vegetables and or grains go well with non-starchy and ocean vegetables. Protein fats go well with acid fruits and non-starchy or ocean vegetables. And animal protein does combine well with fats. However, animal protein does not combine well with starchy vegetables and grains. So instead of having that burger on a bun, you might consider having that burger on a plate of vegetables and salad. The 80-20 principle is the idea that you eat until you're 80% full, leaving 20% room for digestive juices. It can also be applied to 80% of the food on your plate should be land and or ocean vegetables, and the other 20% can be either your starchy vegetables and grains or your animal protein, but not both of those together according to the combination rule is over there. Okay. Principle number 7 is step-by-step creating a hearty inner ecosystem, nourishing your adrenals and thyroid, conquering infections and dangerous fungus such as candida, basically cleansing. And really, I think the missing link is incorporating all those fermented foods, amplifying nutrients, things like kimchi, sauerkraut, coconut kefir water, or goat milk kefir, if you tolerate that. And of course, proper food preparations. So again, the sprouting and soaking and fermenting is very important to body ecology diets as well. The low oxalate diet. So this is kind of, it hasn't been talked a lot about in the past, but it's kind of becoming a lot of the conversation today. Oxalates or oxalates are anti-nutrients and mineral inhibitors. Again, they bind minerals, rendering minerals and nutrients in your food unavailable to you. And they also require your nutrient stores in order to process them. So oxalic acid and oxalate are terms that are used interchangeably. They are organic acids found in plants. They're usually bound to minerals forming oxalate crystals. Oxalates can be made in the body as well, and they can also be obtained from food. So for instance, vitamin C, particularly in the form of ascorbic acid, can be converted to oxalate. So it's important not to exceed 250 milligrams of ascorbic acid per day. There are a lot of other better forms of vitamin C, whole complex forms of natural vitamin C that are much healthier choices, and which you can certainly consume more of. Mold and fungus, particularly aspergillus, which is an agricultural mold, often found in things like peanuts and corn and whatnot, is often found in the gut. And this can also contribute to oxalate formation. Often higher levels of yeast or candida correlate with higher levels of oxalate as well. Gut dysbiosis or lack of balance within the microflora can also contribute to oxalates, and antibiotic use can also contribute to antioxidants as it can disturb your microflora balance. Genetics can additionally contribute to high oxalates, so hyperoxaluria is sometimes a genetic condition. Oxalates bound together in the gut is typically eliminated in the stool, or it can be excreted in urine, and it can also be stored in body tissue, which is not what we want. Oxalate is an ion molecule with a negative charge, and again, it can bind to metals or minerals in our body. Oxalate calcium crystals are very tightly bound and difficult to break apart. Additionally, mercury oxalate crystals are also very hard to break apart. Oxalate can bind to mercury, lead, copper, zinc, cadmium, calcium, magnesium, and oxalates can disrupt our mineral balance. Mercury oxalate crystals can be particularly problematic because they actually tend to bury deeply within our body, and they may be almost impossible to ever truly remove from the body. Whereas oxalate calcium crystals and magnesium can more easily be excreted from the body or eliminated. So oxalates not bound to calcium can also impair mitochondrial function. So they can actually get into our cell wall, into our cells, and damage our mitochondria, deplete our glutathione antioxidant, and create oxidative stress. And this is also clinically seen in autism. Magnesium and vitamin B6 deficiencies can increase the tendency to form oxalate crystals. So ensuring that we have plenty of magnesium and B6 is helpful to reduce oxalate crystal formation within our body. High oxalates can cause damage to tissues and kidneys and bones. It can damage the brain. When oxalates bind to calcium, it can form crystals, which are jagged and have sharp edges. It can cause inflammation and pain and eye pain. Fibromyalgia pain, it can cause pain in the feet, which can resemble gout and actually be from oxalate crystals and not uric acid crystals. Oxalate crystals in nerve tissue can lead to neuropathy and pain. In the kidneys, oxalates can form kidney stones. Oxalates can cause pain when urinating and hyperoxaluria. Oxalate tissues can interfere with thyroid function, and high oxalates can cause moodiness, irritability, and aggression. And additionally, foggy thinking, language impairment, food addictions, bedwetting, urinary complaints or pain, vulvar pain, skin rashes, stimming, GI complaints, sandy stool, headaches, painful burning feet, inflammation, pain, joint pain, sleep disturbance, fatigue, low muscle tone, again, mitochondrial dysfunction, thyroid issues, blood sugar issues, kidney stones or family history, fibro pain, peripheral neuropathy pain. A study, this is from the Great Plains lab in an article on oxalate acid test or oxalate control. The study found a 3-fold greater level of plasma oxalate levels and a 2.5-fold greater level of urine oxalate levels in children with autism, and concludes that hyperoxaluria may have links to autism pathology. According to Great Plains Lab, 84% of children with oxalates have high levels of oxalate outside the normal range. Low oxalate diet benefits include improving fine gross motor, handwriting, social skills, cognitive ability, receptive, expressive language, more imaginative play, emotional flexibility, reduced aggression, self-abuse, bedwetting, and reduced sleep problems as well. Actually, let me go back to that there. In the chart there, you can see the normal controls on the right had lower levels of oxalates, and on the left, the autism case studies had much higher levels of oxalates. So how to follow a low oxalate diet? It is impossible to avoid all oxalates, and many foods with oxalates are also really healthy foods. So again, important of having a diverse diet. Foods that are very high in oxalates include soy and spinach. Eliminating or minimizing these huge offenders can really go a long way in reducing your oxalate load. Other foods high in oxalates are nuts, especially almonds and peanuts. And of course, as you may recall, diets including the specific carbohydrate diet or GAPS diet can often be too high in nuts, in particular almond flour. Most beans are high in oxalates. Beets and beet greens, Swiss chard, field greens, most kale, figs, rhubarb, amaranth, buckwheat, and quinoa are very high in oxalates. Sweet potatoes, some berries, kiwi, starfruit, chocolate, citrus, peel, tea. And again, that Great Plains Lab has a wonderful article and a great list of oxalate foods. Certain diets, again, can be very high. The specific carbohydrate diet, the GAPS diet, the body ecology diet can be high in oxalates. Proper food preparation is really helpful in reducing oxalates. So for instance, fermenting your grains, so not only just soaking and sprouting, but adding a touch of raw apple cider vinegar to your soak, it can slightly ferment those grains and help to reduce the oxalate. And then, of course, as you're cooking quinoa, you might notice a lot of foamy broth up at the top of the water. This is a lot of the oxalate and phytic acid and anti-nutrients and undigestible things coming off. So you can actually just take a spoon and scoop some of that froth right out of there. Same thing with beans as well. Reducing high oxalate foods in the diet can be extremely helpful, but it is also very important that you always reduce oxalates very slowly. When you reduce oxalates, you can actually have a flare up of symptoms known as oxalate dumping. Your body's dumping oxalates when you're not consuming them anymore, and thus the symptoms flare up. So you always want to remove oxalates very slowly from the diet or reduce them slowly. As I mentioned earlier, calcium and magnesium, in particular calcium citrate and magnesium citrate. These can be very useful to help bind oxalate and eliminate or excrete oxalate from the body. Supplementing with B6 can also help to degrade oxalate. The organic acids test by Great Plains Lab has oxalic markers that can really be helpful. However, I will mention that Susan Owens, who has studied oxalates in thousands and thousands of patients with oxalate and glycolic and glyceric markers, has mentioned that within the organic acid test, the normal range can still be high or problematic for some people. So just because you might appear to not have a high range of oxalates and you might appear to be within the normal range, it doesn't mean that you don't have a problem with oxalates. And as you may recall back from the Nourishing Hope food pyramid, it really recommends that people at least reduce or eliminate oxalates in general for the general population. Moving right along to the low FODMAPs diet. So FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Some people are not able to digest these complex carbohydrates. Undigested, these foods can be fermented by bacteria in the gut. They can cause gas, bloating, pain, diarrhea, constipation. Removing foods that feed bacteria can relieve the gastrointestinal symptom. It can also by removing these foods, you can also eliminate or reduce drawing of water into the intestines, which is very common in diarrhea. Sue Shepherd and Peter Gibson's book is quite wonderful at explaining this diet here. This diet basically avoids fermentable carbohydrates. It avoids oligosaccharides, fructans, onion, artichoke, asparagus, beets, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, garlic, leeks, peas, white bulb part of green onions, and also fructooligosaccharides, or FOS, which you might also be aware is in some probiotic brands, so keep a lookout for that. It avoids monosaccharides and fructose, things like apples, pears, mango, watermelon, and honey, and it avoids disaccharides such as lactose, again, dairy. It avoids legumes, it avoids polyols and sugar alcohol. Common symptoms of FODMAP intolerance include gastrointestinal complaints, pain and inflammation, headaches, head banging, self-injurious behavior. The low FODMAPs diet is particularly effective for irritable bowel syndrome, gas, bloating, diarrhea, small intestine bacteria, overgrowth. Stubborn IBS or SIBO may need to be in combination with a low FODMAPs diet combined with a grain-free diet, such as specific carbohydrate diet, GAPS, or paleo. And moving right along to low phenol diets, low phenol and salicylate, Feingold, or fail-safe diets. The Feingold cookbook was originally designed for children with hyperactivity and other problems associated with food additives and salicylates. So foods high in salicylates are not well tolerated by everyone. They can trigger the same behavior, learning, or health problems as additives, according to Feingold. Feingold.org is a great resource online. This diet removes harmful artificial additives. It removes food colors and preservatives, which are petroleum-based, and it removes problematic salicylates from the diet, which are found in a lot of plant foods, including willow bark and aspirin. The initial 4 to 6 weeks of elimination is followed by a provocation phase of the diet, starting with tomatoes. One food is tested at a time for 3 to 4 days with observations for tolerance levels, and in the absence of symptoms, the food may continue to be eaten. Artificial additives, which are petroleum-based, food flavors and food colors should always be avoided. You can see that there's actually a lot of overlap in some of these healing diets, you know, bringing in principles like avoiding artificial additives and food flavors and food colors. You know, you're going to see that on Nourishing Traditions, and you're going to see that on Body Ecology Diet or GAPS or Weston Price. So anyhow, there are a lot of overlaps in these diets. Let's kind of break down what is going on with salicylates or phenols just a little bit more. So artificial phenols are petroleum-based and found in food additives, colors, flavors, and preservatives. Salicylates are a type of phenol naturally found in most food, especially in fruit and vegetables, tomatoes, apples, berries, grapes, almonds, honey, herbs, and spices. There are also phenolic amines and histamines, and glutamates can also be problematic. So all of these in common have to be broken down by PST, which is the phenylsulfotransporase enzyme. Serotonin and dopamine are neurotransmitters that, interestingly, are also phenolic amines. Additionally, C. difficile, I mentioned this earlier on, Clostridia difficile produces 4-cresol, which is also a phenolic compound. So therefore, if you're having problems with phenols, addressing a C. difficile infection can actually help improve one's tolerance to phenolic foods with time and healing. Here was this article on the right here by Feingold on hyperkinesis and learning disabilities linked to artificial food flavors and colors. The McCann study, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, indicates that hyperactivity is associated with difficulties in school achievements, in particular reading, and adverse effects from food are seen in the general population, not just those with hyperactivity or autism spectrum, but it is seen within the general population. The Lau study also notes and highlights the synergistic effect. So when you start to combine one or more of these artificial colors or flavors, the combined effect is greater than the effect of any one of these on their own. We see adverse reaction to synthetic flavors and colors. We see gastrointestinal, neurological, respiratory, skeletal, and skin problems. Children find relief from the Feingold diet. They're able to get off their medications. They find they're calmer, less frustrated, have fewer tantrums. They relate better socially to other children. The home environment is improved, and they are more attentive, perform better in school, and are overall happier, according to Feingold. So let's go back and look at this chart here from Julie Matthews, Bioindividual Nutrition Institute, effects of faulty biochemistry in autism. So again, when methylation, which is up in the top blue square, is faulty, we may not have adequate PST, which is that phenylsulfotransporase enzyme, which is down in the lower right in the sulfation portion of the methylation cycle, and therefore phenols may not be tolerated. So decreased methylation leads to decreased methionine and decreased homocysteine, which leads to decreased transsulfuration in the green, reduced cysteine, reduced glutathione antioxidant, and decreased sulfation. We need enough sulfation for phenylsulfonylurea's. One way that we can get or help our body, in addition to addressing any genetic defects and supporting methylation and addressing any underlying infections such as Clostridia difficile, or reducing our phenolic foods for a time to allow for gut healing. Another nice addition that we can add is Epsom salt soaks or baths. Epsom salt is a great source of sulfate. So again, the Feingold diet, let's look specifically at the Feingold diet versus the fail-safe diet. The Feingold diet is a smaller list of the most commonly problematic salicylates. It's easier to do than the fail-safe. The fail-safe diet, however, is more comprehensive. It can provide more information if things are not turning out to be much better by simply doing the Feingold diet. You might want to go further into the fail-safe diet. It's more comprehensive, more restrictive, more accurate, and it's also harder to do. It's free of additives, low in salicylates, amines, and flavor enhancers. It removes phenols, salicylates, amines, and glutamates. It was originally designed to treat ADHD. So just looking at some of the food lists, you can see on the left here the salicylate foods, tomatoes at the top, and almonds, apples and cider vinegar, apricots, berries, including gooseberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, cherries, cucumbers, pickles, currants, grapes, and raisins, mint flavors, wintergreen, nectarines, oranges, peaches, prunes, plums, tea, herbs, and spices. Foods that are high in amines include things like banana, yellow cheese or cheese, aged or blue cheese, chocolate or cocoa, wine and beer, fermented foods, including sauerkraut, yogurt, and tempeh, soy sauce, bone broths, meat, and aged meats. And glutamate foods include that monosodium glutamate, autolyzed yeast, soy sauce, Parmesan cheese, Vegemite, Marmite, sauerkraut, bone broths, gelatin, peas, corn, tomatoes. And again, when determining dietary direction, I mentioned earlier, looking to see if a patient or an individual has any particular cravings. For instance, if a child is really craving Vegemite, this could be a clue here. So again, meat can actually be problematic for some children who are born with an inability to produce an enzyme, a phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme responsible for the conversion. And it can lead to a toxic buildup of phenylalanine and brain damage, resulting in autistic-like conditions. So, everything is very complex, and what diet, really works for one individual may not work for another individual, or you might need to piece together some different diets to really bio-individualize the diet that is going to work for that individual. Symptoms of phenol intolerance include hyperactivity, sleep disturbance, red cheeks and ears, aggression, irritability, self-injurious or head banging, diarrhea, headaches, inappropriate laughter, hives, or skin rashes, sometimes seizures. Low phenol diets can be beneficial also for people with irritable bowel syndrome. When someone is unable to break down phenols, removing the offending food relieves the burden in the biochemical process so nutrients can be repleted or replaced. So we want to remove the offending foods so that we can restore the gut and replenish the nutrients. The Feingold diet benefits a range of symptoms, including cognitive difficulties, auditory processing, visual processing, repetitive actions, compulsive actions, irritability, anxiety, depression, mood, short attention spans, muscle coordination, writing, dyslexia, speech, tics, seizures, ear infections, asthma, headaches, bedwetting, gastrointestinal complaints, hives and rashes, congestion, impulsive actions, aggression, danger awareness, concerns, sleep and nightmares, to name a few. Looking more into the low histamine diet. So histamine-rich foods include alcohol and other fermented beverages, fermented foods and dairy products, including yogurt and sauerkraut. dried fruits, avocados, eggplant, spinach, processed or smoked meat, shellfish, aged cheese, banana, pineapple, papaya, strawberry, wheat germ, and nuts. So foods that trigger histamine release in the body can also include alcohol, bananas, tomatoes, wheat germ, beans, papaya, chocolate, citrus nuts, especially walnuts, cashews, and peanuts, food dyes, and additives. People with a histamine intolerance may have inefficient diamine oxidase enzyme, the DAO enzyme, and they also often have SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth as well. All right, that was a lot in diet. So as you can see, there are a lot of diets out there. There's no one right diet for any specific person. There's a lot of strategies and clues that we can look into to figuring out what is the right path. And one of those paths is also your current lifestyle. You know, are you home? Are you able to successfully take on a diet, or are you working and traveling and eating out a lot and not able to take on a certain diet? Or are you a child on the spectrum and do you have super duper picky eating habits, you know, which would render a lot of these diets really not doable or very challenging, to say the least. And you certainly don't want to end up in a worse situation where now your child's not, you know, maybe they were only eating, you know, 5 or 10 foods and now they're only eating 2 foods, and that's going to be a huge loss in nutrition and nourishment. So as far as strategies for kids go, number one is, whenever possible, involve your children in food preparation. It is really important to get them interacting with the food, to handling the food, playing with the food, smelling the food, and experiencing the food on so very many different levels. It also can give them a sense of ownership of the food as well, and can help, you know, to spur their curiosity and willingness to try a new food. Another good tip is to cook your grains and your pastas in broths, veggie broths, bone broths. This can add a huge amount of nutrients to the food. And additionally, along those lines, if you are serving a tomato sauce, you might just first put that tomato sauce in the food processor with a bunch of cooked veggies, and puree that sauce right up, and you know, pack it full of so many more veggies and put it right back in the same jar that you took it out of. It's unlikely your kids will know the difference. If you are putting a lot of green vegetables, green cabbage or broccoli, kale, things like that, collards, into your tomato sauce, that is going to change the color of the tomato sauce. It's going to turn kind of brown. Or if you're adding beans is another thing I've added into tomato sauce at times. You know, your kid might complain about that. So one good tip there is to put a little bit of a cooked beet. Doesn't take much into that puree as well, and that will kind of bring it right back to red again. In fact, it's going to be overly red. It might be almost like a fuchsia red color, but you know, they might notice that, but they're less likely to complain about that as opposed to a brown tomato sauce. Smoothies, of course, are a great way to incorporate vegetables into it, although again, sometimes color can get tainted. So using an opaque cup and or with a lid and straw can be helpful there. Finding a cup with a handle. So when they're drinking at their mealtime, they have a cup of water, whatever it is. A cup with a handle actually is really interesting, because when they are gripping that cup, their fingers are actually pressing into the palm of their hand, into certain pressure points there that can help with a lot of sensory issues around tactile and olfactory, and can actually make eating food easier for them to do. Good seating is also very important. You don't want a little kid sitting in a big kid chair. You really want a seat where they are sitting at a good height to their table, where their feet are firmly on the ground or on a step stool or whatever it is, because good posture actually goes a long way to allowing them to focus on the food they're eating and not focus on all the other challenges and sensories that are going on with dangling feet or the table being too high or whatnot. Keep food portions separate on the plate. Mixing foods doesn't always go very well to the picky eater. And keep new or less desirable portions small. And things that you know your child's going to like, you can make those portions bigger. Allow kids to play and handle the food as needed. And, offer the food many, many, many times. Offer it 10, 15, 20, 30 plus times. Don't give up. Just keep offering it. Offer it. If you need to take a short break, fine. Come back and offer it again, and keep doing that, because eventually they will likely be more willing to try that food. Supplements can also be problematic for a lot of kids too, with sensory issues. And just some little tips: if you're feeding capsules to your child, tucking your chin is really helpful, because the capsules will often float up to the back of your mouth if you tuck your chin, and then they go down really easy. If you're offering your child a tablet, these tend to sink, so tossing your head back for the tablets is important. You can also look online on Amazon or a number of other sites for pill swallowing cups. These can also be really helpful. And it's best to look for one that's opaque, because you don't want a translucent cup that they're looking through and they're seeing these little capsules floating in the top of the cup. That's not going to work. And just lastly, make it fun. I love to use skewers with my food. I'll put just about anything on it, pieces of veggies or fruit, or my kid just absolutely loves his olive skewers, as you can see in this picture here. And I put together a salad of sorts as a rainbow, a little bit of sauerkraut on the left there. And everything is pretty separate. Nothing's really mixed up. So it's easy for my child to go for what he wants and to not feel overwhelmed by the process. Just want to touch base briefly on supportive supplements. So methylcobalamin, B12, and folate, which is a B9. These have been found to be very helpful in supporting the methylation cycle. They are best together. And finding those methyl versions and methylfolate is really important as well. Synthetic folic acid is very difficult or impossible to utilize, especially to someone who has an MTHFR defect. As I mentioned earlier, about 79% of the autism spectrum population does have an MTHFR defect. So making sure it is a methylfolate, a bioavailable form of folate or folinic acid, not to be confused with folic acid. B6, P5P is the most usable form, goes really well with magnesium. This combination is actually said to be very helpful for hyperactivity. Sulforaphane is a brassica derived from brassica sprouts. It's a wonderful detoxicant. Zinc is very helpful and beneficial to hundreds of enzymatic reactions in the body. Our omegas, EPA and DHA, are wonderful in supporting the brain. Digestive enzymes, of course, to help with digestion. And if you do err in diet, taking digestive enzymes or activated charcoal for that matter, as soon as possible, can help to alleviate any repercussions to a diet error. Probiotics are really useful at restoring the gut. They can be taken with meals. They can also be taken apart with meals. There's a lot of benefit from taking a probiotic before bedtime, away from a meal, so that it can help to establish a healthy microbiome overnight while your child's sleeping. Multivitamins, your average multivitamin may not prove to be very beneficial. It in fact can also be problematic, because you're getting just a general dose of things, and while some of the nutrients in the multivitamin might be beneficial, other nutrients or amounts of nutrients might be more harmful as opposed to beneficial. So it's hard to be accurate. It's hard to get enough of the right thing, and it's hard to ensure that you're getting the right amounts of different nutrients. That said, there are some multivitamins out there specifically made for autism spectrum. The Autism Research Institute in particular has one multivitamin that was used, I believe, in that study that I had mentioned earlier, the 2018 study on nutrition and dietary intervention. And it is a fantastic supplement. L-carnitine is really helpful in that fatty acid transport and getting fats and fuels into our cells. Taurine is super helpful and can also be beneficial to seizures. Vitamin D, of course, to support immune system and healthy bone growth. Lithium, our autism spectrum patients tend to be low in lithium. They also tend to be low in cholesterol, and having enough cholesterol is really important. Cholesterol is the basis for many of our hormone productions, and also can help with bonding and social interaction and relationship. N-acetylcysteine can also be very helpful. It can be a precursor to glutathione production and can also help with a wide variety of things. Quercetin can be excellent at supporting for allergies and inflammation. Vitamin C, of course, to support the immune system. DMG and TMG to help with that methylation process. GABA can be great to help with anxiety and hyperactivity and other things there. Melatonin can help with sleep. Calcium as well, you know, if we're following a dairy-free diet, you know, we can certainly get plenty of calcium from eating a lot of green and leafy vegetables, but if we're a picky eater too, that can be hard. So we might need to supplement with calcium. Saccharomyces boulardii is actually a yeast, but it's considered a probiotic. It can be particularly beneficial if you are having to take antibiotics for any reason, because what happens when we take antibiotics is that we wipe out everything, not only the bad, but the good. And then yeast is like, oh, hey, I can have a heyday. I can move in everywhere and expand and grow. And by incorporating some Saccharomyces boulardii, we can keep opportunistic or pathogenic yeast kind of more at bay. And of course, there's a lot more supplements out there. This is just a brief snapshot. Epsom salt soaks, as I mentioned earlier, are an excellent source of sulfate and detoxification as well. And just a quick comparison, as I mentioned earlier, I did do a study around diet and nutrition, and about 80% of kids have gastrointestinal complaints. This chart's looking at supplements and ones that parents thought to be most effective. And as we can see, the enzymes in black and the probiotics in that bright pink, and the omegas in that darker purple, magnesium in yellow, and folate in that light green, and zinc in the dark blue were kind of all at the top of the list, whereas multivitamins in the brown were kind of at the bottom of the list as least effective. But again, I don't want to discount the fact that there are now some wonderful multivitamin formulas specifically made for those on the spectrum, so those might be worth exploring. And L-carnitine, as I mentioned, you know, according to this author, Dr. John Pangborn, in his nutritional supplement use book, which is a wonderful resource, he says, in my opinion, a diagnosis of autism is sufficient to warrant trial use of L-carnitine supplements. Again, some of those specialty multivitamins for autism already have the L-carnitine in it. And according to Julie Matthews, carnitine supplement could be protective to fetal brain development, and could be a prime candidate to be added to nutritional guidelines for pregnant women in the near future as well. Let's see. Here was this quote from Pangborn up at the top here. Has carnitine adequately been measured in autism? Yes. Is it adequate? No, it's not. 83% of those tested had free and total carnitine levels below the laboratory preference mean, or reference mean. So again, from John Pangborn's book, you know, we want to, prerequisites include removing and avoiding toxic stressors, and detoxifying and ridding of inflammation. Removing and avoiding infection stressors, microorganisms and their toxins can also lead to inflammation. We want to fix the diet, gluten-free, casein-free, organic at a minimum. We want relational therapy and special ed sessions as well. And then he has like a whole recommendation of supplements that you can go through, but you know, initially starting with digestive enzymes and calcium, magnesium, and multi-minerals, taurine, L-carnitine, multivitamins with the B complex, folate, A, C, D, and E, melatonin if needed, and omegas. So again, I just want to really highlight, you know, that environmental insults initiate autism in genetically sensitive individuals by promoting cellular oxidative stress and initiating adaptive responses that include reduced methylation activity. Impaired methylation in turn leads to developmental delay and deficit in attention and neuronal synchronization that are hallmarks of autism. And this statement comes out of the Death R et al. 2007 study. Severity of autism correlates with heavy metal toxicity, suggests that methylation is likely more impaired in more severe cases of autism. This has been found in a number of studies, the Nataf et al., the Geyer, D et al., Adams, JB et al. So again, genetics may predispose a child's risk factor for autism, while environmental triggers may determine the outcome. Sources of heavy metal toxicity can include vaccinations, silver amalgam mercury fillings, energy efficient light bulbs, water, high food chain fish or farm-raised fish. Farm-raised fish are often fed other wild-caught fish, so they bioaccumulate whatever has been in there. It's important to eat your fish low on the food chain. Fish like sockeye salmon or sardines that are predominantly plankton eaters, they don't bioaccumulate nearly as many heavy metals. Chicken, turkey, and hog, these animals are often fed foods that are laced with arsenic to kill off parasites and also to help pink up the flesh when it goes to market. Lots of times, these facilities, these large-scale animal factories, the arsenic will actually leach from the animal's elimination down and contaminate groundwater, where then we have things like rice. Rice is actually becoming contaminated with arsenic nowadays. Rice, more so than other flora, has the ability to uptake arsenic. Pesticides can also be high in heavy metals, and genetically modified foods, of course, often get sprayed with more pesticides. Air pollution is another concern, and proximity to freeways. I believe the study was looking at an increased risk and increased exposure within 309 meters of a major freeway. Glyphosate is very, very damaging. It disrupts the gut microbiome. It causes a decrease in beneficial microflora and an increase in harmful opportunistic and pathogenic bacteria, things like Salmonella, Clostridia, and Candida. So it's very important to eat organically whenever possible. Refer to that Clean 15 food list on time. Those are foods that you can cut corners on that don't necessarily have to be organic. And then the Dirty Dozen food list are ones that you always want to eat organically or don't eat them. So again, with glyphosate, we see that it kills, if you look at the chart on the right there, it kills the beneficial bacteria. It increases the harmful bacteria, and it increases toxic phenols from harmful bacteria, and hence, that whole road that might lead us to the need to follow a low phenol diet for a time. It increases inhibition of dopamine. It increases dopamine systole and increased toxic dopamine metabolites as well. And this increased damage is damaging to brain mitochondria and increases denaturization of axonal structure proteins and Krebs cycle enzymes and decreased energy. So glyphosate is bad. Eat organic whenever possible. Tylenol, I just want to give a mention too. This was a study done looking at the US and Cuba, and 298% more autism cases were found in the US than in Cuba. Interestingly, both Cuba and the US require a large amount of vaccines. However, the big difference was that in Cuba, Tylenol is not an over-the-counter medication. It is hard to get. It requires a prescription, and very few people use Tylenol. And as a result, perhaps this may have something to do with why there were so few cases of autism in Cuba, whereas in the US, Tylenol or acetaminophen is largely and widely used, and it is almost always recommended to be used when vaccinations are received to help minimize the side effects and complaints and discomforts of the vaccine. So this is just a really interesting fact. Tylenol is also hard on the liver, and it's not something to be used long-term and should be used with caution. Mold and mycotoxins in the environment are also hugely problematic. They can cause a host of concerns: respiratory, nervous, headaches, skin, gastrointestinal, immune system, emotional dysregulation, pain, cognition. Aflatoxin is an agricultural mold. As I've mentioned several times, it's often found in corn and peanuts and tree nuts. It should be added to the list of neurodevelopmental chemicals associated with autism, according to the Kilburn et al. Study. Detoxification strategies include dietary strategies. There's chelation supplements, charcoal, zeolite or bentonite, clay, silica, such as Jarosil or Biosil, infrared saunas, and Epsom salt magnesium sulfate baths. And for a population with reduced methylation, supporting this process may really be necessary. Tips for growing a healthy baby. It is very important to detoxify the home and workspace, utilize water filters, air filters, and non-toxic products, eat organically and GMO-free. Both mom and dad should be allergy-free. This is very important. Pre-conception, both parents should identify and remove any and all offending allergy foods or intolerance foods, and eliminate them before conception. It has been found that allergens lots of times could be passed on to the unborn, to the child, to the future child, from the parents, from mom or dad to the child. Supplements to consider, of course, include that bioavailable form of folate, methyl B12, that B6 as P5P, L-carnitine, zinc. Quality counts when it comes to supplements. It's important to cleanse and rid yourself of infections, pathogens, and toxins, and be sure to boost your immune system. Takeaways for getting started. I love this flower from Bioindividual Nutrition Institute. Number 1, avoiding junk food. Number 2, get the toxins out. Number 3, eat healthier. 4, supplement wisely. 5, avoid gluten, casein, and soy. And 6, take good care of yourself. 2 things that you can really do to get started would be to start food journaling. Keep a journal. Note what it is that you're eating, when you're eating it, any combinations, if you're taking supplements or not, and pay attention to how you feel physically, mentally, how your mood or behavior is. And number 2 would be to start removing artificial ingredients, food additives, food colors, junk food, all that. So again, I just want to remind you that I'm not a medical doctor, a physician, or a registered dietitian or psychologist or any other licensed medical professional. I do not diagnose, treat, or cure illness, and I do not prescribe. Information shared here is not intended to replace advice from your medical doctor or licensed healthcare provider. So you should always seek medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment regarding your unique health situation with your own primary care physician and other qualified care providers. Consult with your medical doctor before making dietary and lifestyle changes. And the content and materials shared in this presentation are gathered from my research and experience and are for general health information and educational purposes only. You can find me online at www.lovingwellnessnow.com. And I just, again, want to thank you so much for taking some time out in your day to listen to all this important information that I have put together. I hope to be in touch with you. Have a fantastic day. Bye for now.